The following video starts with a discussion that I was lucky enough to have with Skip Arp. Skip is a highly accomplished dirt late model driver from Georgetown, Tennessee, with countless victories on the biggest of stages. He was inducted into the Dirt Late Model Hall of Fame in 2015 and is credited for the invention of the left rear spring behind setup in 1998, which is the setup that every single dirt late model, modified, and decoupled four-link car in the country is currently implementing. Skip was gracious enough to take the time to tell me the story behind this evolutionary leap forward, and after our conversation, we're going to do a deep dive on whether Skip got lucky and struck gold or used intuition to leverage the use of a very important concept in suspension design to find even more success. So, give me a lay of the land before April of '98. What was the current left rear suspension configuration that you guys were running? What did the cars handle like? How were you personally running at that time? Just kind of walk me through what
Well,
the
we was actually, I thought we was running okay. I mean, that was the first year I'd ever tried to run a points deal, have a Tampa, and uh, I mean, we was running good. I mean, we'd won, I think, a couple of races up to that point, and we had some good runs. But it's that engineering part. You always want to try to be better, and thought we needed more traction, and that time we went to Brownstown, I thought we kind of sucked and wasn't as good as we need to be. So, that's when I got to looking at the left rear and decided to change it. And really, they really, from the shock and spring in front, uh, all we done was build a bracket and moved it to the back. So, like I said, we didn't really know what it was going to do, other than I knew that looking at it that it should load in the spring more and keep more load in it to get it up on the bars. Was running off a bar angle, and that's kind of where it started.
right? So, before you guys moved it to the back. Everyone was pretty much running a four link, with the shock and spring in front of the axle
I
tube.
think so. Yeah, everybody was on standard four link, shock in front, and different bar links. But everybody was still just on the shock and spring. Everybody was kind of toting the left front, and everybody was up on the bars, but uh, kind of toting the left front and carrying the left front. But this just kept more load into the spring, when we moved it to the back.
Right. So who all was involved? I know obviously you were involved, but so who else was involved with this kind of the moving of the left rear behind, and what accommodations did you guys need to make from a fabrication or a packaging standpoint?
Well, there again, I wasn't very smart, but I just kept looking and thinking it would have to be better being to the back, the shock and spring rather than the front. And I'd called Joe Garrison at GRT and told him I want him to build me a bird cage with a shock mount on the back, just like the front was. And he kind of laughed and thought that was funny that I wanted to do, the shock spring on the back. And he wanted to know why. And I said, well, I just think it might be more traction, load in the spring more the way the thing indexes. And so anyway, it was a 2 or 3 weeks after that before I got a bird cage. Back then we was running aluminum bird cages, and they was all welded up. So I didn't have a way to weld aluminum, and he welded me a shock mount on the back, and that's kind of where it all got going.
Right. So obviously you had to build a bird cage with the shock mount on the backside. Did you have to weld a tube in, I'm assuming, on top to allow for some kind of shock mount on the top?
I did. Now that was something I knew I could do. I could weld on the chassis and shock mounts, and all I done didn't know where I needed it for sure, but I just moved it, the same amount to the back, and welded a couple more shock mounts in. And when we moved it, just bolted it right back in the same place. And uh, it was you know, it was kind of one of them deals. We didn't test much because we was racing all the time. So, I thought, well, shoot, I mean, if it ain't no good, all I got to do is move it back to the front. Still had our shock mounts on there. It wouldn't like it was gonna hurt us. Something we couldn't put back. So, we just welded new mounts in there, and he built a bird cage, and we ended up going to the racetrack, and it was pretty good right out of the box, really.
Hmm. Wow. So pretty much it was bolt on, and you guys had pretty substantial performance gains right out of the gate.
It was, yeah. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks after that, after I told him I wanted that, we'd actually got back home. We stayed on the road quite a bit, and he sent it to me, and I put it on, and we went to West Virginia Motor Speedway, and I think we set fast time and broke a drive shaft in a heat race, and
Hmm.
didn't really shouldn't have been nothing no different on why it should have broke the drive shaft. It just broke, and other than we did have more traction, and we knew the car was pretty good, and then ended up at Pittsburgh the next night, and we won the. Yeah, I think. Well, actually, I didn't even qualify on the pole. We qualified third at Pittsburgh, and then I won my heat race, and then in the feature we kind of killed them guys, and that was the really the second race we run it, and we knew that there was something there. We didn't know what to do with it, but we just knew it was 2 or 3 tenths better just by moving the shock from the front to the back.
Right. So you didn't necessarily you didn't have to make any bar angle adjustments. You really all you guys did was put the shock and spring back there, it
That's
sounds like.
that's it. I mean, no spring change, no nothing, which that come later on,
Hmm.
playing with all that. But we didn't. The only thing we done was just moved it, from the front to the back, and I think every time we practiced, or we didn't practice much, every time we raced, it was 2 or 3 tenths, better. If we did bolt it back on the front to see, then put it back to back, we was 2 or 3 tenths better. So that's kind of where it all started and still is, really.
Right. Yeah, we're still doing it today. Do you happen to remember kind of what the bar lengths and angles were at that time?
I don't. I mean, that's terrible not to know that, but I know we run all the bar angle we could on the left side, to keep from camming the bird cage over, and all that mess. But back then we run 15 and 17-inch bars on the left side, and 15 and a half, 15, or 15 and a half, 17 and a half on the right side. I remember that. And of course, we changed that a lot. We run shorter bars on top and longer bars on top. I mean, we changed that a bunch,
Hmm.
but still, it was kind of the 15, 17-inch bars we run. But as far as angles, I don't think the angles is really no different than what we're doing today. You
Yeah,
know,
I was about to say, I bet they're the same as they are right now. But
today, that's right. Yep.
um, what about spring rate? Do you remember what spring you guys were running?
Yeah, it was crazy. Back then, I'll never forget this. We had I ain't saying we was no good, but now we could go about anywhere and be competitive at all the different tracks we run, and we'd run like a 5-4, and a 3 and a 2. That was kind of our spring combination. Of course, that all changed too. Went to softer right fronts a little bit, and you know, 225s, 250 left rears, and 225, 250 right rears. But it was a 5-4-3-2. That was our spring numbers that we run a bunch, and was pretty competitive everywhere. Back then.
Right. What handling differences did you feel whenever you would do those back-to-back tests?
I think I should have been a drag racer. I think at the
Mhm.
time all I wanted was more traction. Everybody wants more traction, so I should have been drag racing maybe, but everybody around the corner, and I just thought, from the middle off it was just better, more traction, not spinning as much. I thought maybe the car was a little bit worse getting in the corner, but it didn't matter because it was much better from the middle off. Once we went to the shock spring behind.
Right. Did the left front stay in the air, or did that have any impact on that?
Yeah, it's still we toted the left front some, still until we started fooling with shocks, and which that was kind of a big thing forever, was toting the left front, which I
Yeah.
I didn't really like it. We just thought that was fast. And a lot of that was panhard bar. You know, we played with that a bunch too, different ones, but
Mhm.
still the shock and spring was just better.
Right.
It was better, and you just even if you gave up some, getting in the corner, it didn't matter because he was so much better, from the middle off.
Right. So that was about mid-season 98. As the story goes, you kind of ripped off a big run of wins there after you guys had figured out this magic trick per se. Talk about that.
Well, that's what's crazy. Of course, back to you too. I think, what I done was something that was easy for everybody to do. I mean, once everybody's seen, you could stand in the infield and see that the shock spring was behind the house, and that wouldn't know, you couldn't hide that. I mean, those pictures took, and I'm telling you, after the second race, the next race, shoot, half the pits had it, behind. And so we didn't have no advantage. Like I said, we didn't know nothing no different other than just moving the shock spring behind. We hadn't played with shocks and a whole bunch of different stuff. So now we're back even again, and we still run good and won some races, but it ain't like we just dominated, after, really the second race. I mean, it's kind of sick, really. If I think if a person could have hid that and had stuff covered up, then sure you could have made a little bit of money for a while. Not me, not so much me driving or nothing. It was just better. But it was better until everybody else was on it. Now we're all the same again.
Right, right, yep. So was 98 the year that you finished second to Bloomer in the Have a
It
Tampa
was.
class?
Yep, yep, sure was. That was the year run second. That was actually the only year that I ever run points. I don't like points. I just don't like points racing because I have a lot of them POQs, and if you're points racing, you can't have them POQs. So pissed off and quit. So if you're points racing, you got to stay out there the whole time, and I just never liked points racing. I just didn't like it, and so we never done no more points racing really until last year. We run that little series we run, but I'd rather race and pick and choose and do what you want to. And if you want a POQ, you just pull in and go home and do it next week.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to drive halfway across the country to go to a track you don't like for not a lot
That's
of money, and
exactly
the
right.
weather
Yeah.
forecast looks terrible. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's definitely the pitfall of points racing, that's for sure.
Right.
So you said it was pretty easy to see. You guys, I mean, it was apparently so easy. You guys didn't try to make any big efforts to try to keep it covered up.
Well, you couldn't. That was the problem too. Back then, Havatampa's rules was no tarps, no covers, no. You couldn't do none of that. So the only thing we could do was try to stand at the left rear and stand
Mhm.
behind. The guys would, and gosh, everybody was coming through. I mean, it was obvious. Looking and seeing, and then when you was on the racetrack, it was really obvious. Man, we got tons of pictures of the car on the left rear, going through the corner, and it was, I mean, you could see the shock and spring behind. It was no problem to see that. So, like I said, all them other guys, it didn't take long. They all figured out, that there's something going on with the shock and spring behind, and I feel like they all done the same thing. And shoot, we're all back, in the same ball field now.
Right, right. You said the next week a decent amount had the shock and spring behind, so it wasn't like there was one guy who was able to copy it first. You don't think?
No, no, I don't think so. I remember Richards and Francis, and that's the guys I was racing with. Gosh, they was all walking by the car and looking, and man, I think the next week every rocket car had it on, and of course,
Right.
Joe, he had most everybody putting it on all the GRTs. So, after we seen it was there was something there, and I'm telling you, it was the craziest thing I ever seen. It was just on then. I guess the craziest thing is, that I don't know why. Well, I mean, I do know why. I mean, it's better in the back than it is in the front. That's pretty obvious. So, everybody's still on that.
Yeah, yeah. You look at any late model today, and the shock and spring's still in the back.
Right, right. I mean,
Did
it's a lot of stuff different, but that's still there anyhow.
Yeah, I don't think it's as different as people think. But did Joe at least do you the courtesy of calling it the Skip Art package when he
Oh
started
no,
selling it to his
well, like I
customers?
said, me and Joe, we was buddies now. I mean, I really miss him. I guess we was more like brothers. When I'd want to do something, he would think it was the craziest thing in the world, but he was like any other chassis builder. If it was good, man, he was all in. So, he was a great guy. I just sure miss him too, and had a lot of fun with him.
Yeah, sounds like if you had a TIG welder, you still may be the only one running it behind.
Well, that's there again. It's kind of a shame, and I keep wanting to bring up what you come up with. You know, it, Yours was way more complicated. See, they didn't really want to do away with this because everybody could do it. It was easy. All you had to do is weld a shock mount on the back of the bird cage, and man, your deal was pretty complicated and was going to cost these chassis guys a lot of work. So, but anyway, I still think what you done was pretty impressive, or real impressive to me. But mine wasn't that good. Like I said, other than if I could have hit it, if we could have hit it for a half a year and won some really good paying races, then it would have been really good. But shoot, after a week or two, I was no different than everybody else again.
Right. Well, I appreciate the kind words, man, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with me about this stuff. I think I'm gonna be able to take some of the things you said and hopefully do some cool animations and kind of illustrate maybe why the spring behind was so much better. And like I said, I really
Well,
appreciate you taking the time, and I hope to run into you at the racetrack sometime soon, man.
well, sure, yeah. Just holler anytime, and man, I enjoy checking you out and seeing what you got going on. So holler if you need me or if I can do anything.
All right, sounds good, Skip. See you, man.
Thank you, buddy. See ya.
Some good stuff from Skip there. Pretty cool when a guy as accomplished as he is can maintain humility and try to convince us that what he did was easy or obvious. Because rest assured, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of dirt racers all looking at the same suspension he was looking at and didn't arrive at the same conclusions. Now let's get on with some technical analysis to try to better explain what happened when he moved the shock and spring behind the axle tube. After doing some thinking about what direction I wanted to take this video, I realized it could get real rabbit holey real fast. And so I'm going to limit it to what I think had the most profound effect and also happens to be a concept that I feel like isn't very well understood in dirt track racing. The left rear tire actually doesn't know where the shock and spring are mounted. All the tire knows is how stiff the suspension feels at the tire, which doesn't necessarily reconcile with the numbers stamped on the spring. This is because of motion ratios. A motion ratio is the ratio of the motion of the suspension, namely the shock and spring, relative to the motion of the tire. To illustrate this, imagine we have a long arm that can pivot on one side. Now on the other side, let's put a 200-pound spring underneath it, and let's have our friend Tyree, who also weighs 200 pounds, stand on that end. The spring should compress 1 inch, which sounds pretty straightforward. Now what would happen if we moved the spring halfway in between the pivot point and Tyree? If you guessed Tyree would move down 2 inches instead of 1 inch, then you're correct. Basically, we're making the 200-pound spring act like a 100-pound spring by doubling the leverage that Tyree has against the spring. If we flip this diagram over, we basically have a simplified version of our independent front suspension. To sum this up, the more leverage the tire has against the spring, or the less the spring moves relative to how much the tire moves, the softer the spring will act. I made a simple CAD model of the left rear suspension using some of the numbers Skip gave us earlier, which, as I mentioned, are eerily similar to the settings that were currently being used on today's cars. As we can see, the shock on the backside of the birdcage is moving less as the tire moves down than on the front side. And remember, the less the shock and spring move relative to the tire, the softer it will act. I went ahead and mapped out the center to center distances of the front and rear shocks relative to the center of the birdcage, which for all intents and purposes is where the tire mounts. And as expected, the front shock is moving a much greater distance when compared to the rear shock. I made a little spreadsheet to show how the effective spring rate was affected by these motion ratios. As you can see, just by moving the shock and spring behind the axle tube, Skip made the spring act 50 to 80 pounds softer through the entire range of travel. This would lead to about 400 pounds more, quote, extended load if the suspension was in fact drooping about 6 inches. This would undoubtedly make the car hike more and stay hiked longer. This, in and of itself, would give the car more wedge, more rear steer, a more aggressive angle of attack, and raise the center of gravity. None of these things are inherently better, but apparently, with the way the cars were optimized at the time, made all of them a little bit faster. Something I've heard people say a surprising amount of times is if we just took the shock and spring and moved it back to the front, the cars would slow down and the racing would get better. With what we just learned, let's do a little bit of myth busting. We could probably just reduce the spring rate by 30 to 40%, slap it up front, and nobody would be able to tell a difference. But let's say we only own one left rear spring. We could literally take the top bar, put it on the bottom, and take the bottom bar and put it on the top. This would change the direction of the indexing and make the front shock act like it was now on the back. With this setup, the extended length of the shock would be within 90 thousandths of an inch of where it was behind the rear end with the old configuration, and the rear steer would also be dead nuts. One last thing I want to touch on before we wrap this video up is the fact that changing the motion ratio also affects the effectiveness of the shock damper. Generally, we want more compression in the left rear, and so that's why we put the shock on the front side of the axle tube, because it has more leverage up there, and generally we want a softer spring rate, which is why we put the spring on the back side of the axle tube. Anyways, to keep this video from getting too off the rails, we're going to end it right here. Obviously we could talk probably forever just on the left rear suspension alone, and maybe we will in another video. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks again to Mr. Skip Arp for taking the time to talk with us today. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll see ya in the next one.